Okay, so welcome back. This is managing change. Managing change is very important. Change happens all the time. The amount of change just in your lifetime so far has just been astounding. In an organization, it can come in a number of forms. Planned change, that is, you are deliberately making small decisions in order to alter things, or unplanned change, and that's change that's imposed by outside the organization. Planned change would be things like we're going to grow by X%, and here's how we're going to do it. Unplanned change is 9/11 in the United States, or the breakup of the Soviet Union, or whatever it is. I mean, those kind of things are just things that shock us from the outside. Now, managers must be prepared to handle both. Okay, so you have to think through scenarios. External forces affect change. So, for example, technology affects change. In 1995, that's 20-ish years ago, very few people were on the internet. Right, I was on because I was in graduate school, but very few people were actually on the internet. The workforce diversity has radically changed, both in the U.S. and in a European context. Globalization is now the norm, not just something that we're talking about theoretically. And ethical behavior. Now, we talked about these in an earlier chapter, and so I'm not going to spend a lot of time rehashing it. But we got to rethink the way that we're going to do business, because globalization has changed things. When we're dealing with workforce diversity, we're going to have an aging workforce, and we're going to have less or fewer young workers being able to make up the difference. Ethical behavior, I mean, how you treat people essentially comes down to the golden rule. Treat people the way you want them to be, or you want them to treat you. Technological change is constantly churning, and that's going to radically affect businesses. Now, it may affect your business just a little, or it may affect it a lot, but it's going to affect it. External forces for change, things like changing work climate, or a company when it's in crisis, or declining effectiveness, that's competition. Competition will cause you to do all kinds of things new. Okay, changing employee expectations, particularly millennials. And now I'm speaking to millennials. What the research tells us about millennials is that they want to matter, they want to have an impact, and they want to have meaning in their work. Well, that wasn't always the case. Some people, roll back the clock 50 years, were just happy I have a job. Okay, so it's a different time now. The scope of change, we have incremental change, and that's a relatively small scope, and then you have strategic change, where you're thinking of that planned change on a large scale. Then you also have transformational change, and that's totally changing directions. Hey, this is the new reality. We have to go this way instead of that way, and that's okay, but you have to understand how this works. Now, when you're changing, you have to go through a process. So there's usually a change agent, and that change agent could be plural. Change agents, it could be an individual or group that undertake the task of managing the change in an organization. If it's not managed, it likely will not go anywhere. You don't send out an email and say, we're going to change this, and then everybody just complies, because it doesn't always work that easily, and you'll be very disappointed if you think that's all you need to do. Effective change leaders build relationships. Now, this is really important. All of leadership is about relationship. It just is. I mean, there's really no way around it. If you care about people, if you increase their commitment, that's the way you move things. Not just by sending out a memo. Well, I can fire them. Well, great. You're not going to have anybody around, and you're just going to have low morale. Think in terms of relationship within the leadership team, between the team and key environmental players. Think in terms of relationship. Now, if you have an internal change agent, that can be good or bad. An advantage of an internal change agent is that they know the system, they know the history, they have to live with the results of the change. Okay, so they're part, they've got some skin in the game. The problem is they may be associated with one faction or another within the organization. They may be too close to be objective. So you might have an external change agent. External change agent would be an outside view. They have a fresh set of eyes. They're probably less biased. Okay, that could be good. Now, the disadvantage is that they may not understand the organization's history like the internal change agent, and so that may be a problem. Now, resistance to change, people resist for a number of reasons. Usually it's things like fear of the unknown, or fear of loss, or failure. What's going to happen to me in my relationships, or how am I going to deal with different personalities, or the politics, or the values that are now inflicted upon us. So when you run into change issues, deal with communication. When I run large class projects, here's what I find. And when I talk about class projects, I don't mean the teams that you're in. I mean, what I do with my students is I have an entire class working on one large project, and it gets unwieldy. You cannot communicate enough. It is hard to over communicate. Just think in terms. I mean, if you until you are completely sick of it, you should not stop saying the same kind of things again and again until everybody says it. You cannot communicate enough. Give the details, give the rationale, let them understand why you're thinking the way you're thinking. Then participation in the process. When people participate, when they have a say, they have ownership, and ownership leads to greater commitment. Okay, so opening up and very often we do this wrong. Very often what we do is we go in a back door and we come up with our plan, and we and the smart managers around us, we come up with a plan, and then we roll it out and inflict it on people, and they dig their feet in. And why are they digging in? This is a great plan. Well, they didn't have any say in the process. Just having a say leads to ownership. Ownership leads to commitment. Okay, so please remember that. That'll save you lots of pain when it comes to change. And then having empathy for people's situations, because every change is going to be potentially positive for some people and potentially negative for others. Kurt Levine, rather, it's spelled Lewin, but it's pronounced Levine. Kurt Levine had a 3-step model, essentially unfreezing the culture, then moving to the next point that you want, and then refreezing. Now, this was a pretty elementary model, but it's pretty right. I mean, here's what we need to change. Here's where we need to move to. And once you move there, you need to anchor that change, or it's not going to last. Organizational development is a lot of what we were talking about in this chapter. And organizational development is a systematic approach to organizational improvement that applies behavioral science theory and research. So when you want to make a change, there's a number of ways that you can do it. And here's what we're diagnosing, and that leads to us trying this intervention. And then there's a feedback loop where we get follow up and find out what else needs to change. It's pretty simple, straightforward. Okay. What are the forces for change? What forces are preserving the status quo? What will most likely make the change? Those are the kind of questions. Now, it can be organizational or group kind of techniques, or it can be individual. Here, we're going to look at organizational. So one of those organizational methods is survey feedback. If you take a survey, it's pretty safe. It's anonymous most of the time. There's no repercussions, and you can usually get some pretty good data. Then there's management by objectives. This was championed by Peter Drucker. And management by objectives is the manager and the employee are sitting down and together, jointly, their goal setting between them in order to figure out what results they're going to get. And again, the upside of this is that there's problem solving to remove the obstacles in goal achievement, and you get to review periodically and find out if you're on track. Okay, quality programs, essentially, how do we infuse service quality? It's that simple, okay? And so it's raising our awareness and our aspirations and our desires to be more quality. Team building is an intervention designed to improve the effectiveness of a work group, okay? Again, relationship. Relationship is very important. Improve the effectiveness of a work group, right? So here you're trying to find feedback about how you operate as a team, talk about errors, successes and failures, how you work together, okay? What you're trying to do ultimately is get to this climate of psychological safety. If you have ever worked in a place where you dare not do this or that because the boss is going to fire you, that's not psychological safety, and you're not going to get a lot done. You're going to do the safe thing every time. You're not going to take risks. Process consultation is an OD method that helps managers and employees improve the processes in an organization. So there are certain methods or processes by which things get done. This is usually like an external consultant that comes in and they diagnose what's going on and they intervene, and then they leave. Okay, they gather, they diagnose, they intervene. They're the external consultants. They come in, they do their thing, and they go. Okay, individual focus techniques, things like skill training, increasing job knowledge and skills if necessary to do a job effectively. Okay, let me pause here for a second. If you ever get a chance to get trained on anything, do it. Volunteer for whatever it is, because it expands you. It makes you more valuable in the marketplace. Just do it. Here, where I am, this year alone, I volunteered for 2 different things. Where one, I had a 1-day training, and another, I had a 3-day training for something going on in our university that we're going to be training other professors and staff about things. That's fine. Does it take more time for me? Yes, but I'm more valuable. Let me tell you something. In 2008, the Great Recession hit in 2008, and in 2009 I was on my local school board back in Virginia where I lived at the time. Now we actually looked at we had to reduce the amount of people in the school system. We just didn't have the money in the budget, and when we're looking at these, there was somebody that was on there that he was slated to be cut. I mean, that's just where he was. He was not a senior person, but he was cross-trained in something that we deemed was valuable. He kept his job because of his cross-training, and somebody else lost theirs. Please take whatever training you can get. It'll pay you huge dividends later on. Okay, then there's leadership training and development. This is just the relational, how to deal with people kind of training. It's always important. It's always useful. You're getting some of this now in org behavior with our case studies, right? With business games in your program or simulations. Okay, then there's executive coaching, which is leadership training on steroids. Role negotiation. Maybe you and your boss need to sit down and talk about, are you expecting the same things of each other? And if not, maybe you need to have a job redesign where you can do things where you sing the high notes more effectively. It may or may not be applicable in your particular situation, but it's worth looking at. And then finally, we have things like health promotion, stress reduction, or making sure that you're physically fit. And finally, career planning, and that's matching an individual's career aspirations with organizational opportunities. Now, we're just about done. Let me park there for a moment. You've been working for the last few weeks on your own career plan. Think through, what are you good at? What did the Myers-Briggs tell you? What did the Big Five personality test? What do the other tests that you've come along, or other things that you've seen that have resonated with you as you've read through this book? Yeah, I really want to be something analytical, or no, I don't want to do anything analytical. I want to be out, mixing with people. That's fine. Just figure out how God created you, because he created you a specific way, and you will only be happy when you're doing the things that he's created you to do. And I'm not just talking about salvation. Of course, salvation is important. But as far as a career, you need to be happy. You'll be happy when you're doing the things that come easily to you. Okay, so think through this carefully. Finally, ethical considerations in organizational development. Select the correct method. Voluntary participation is almost always a better plan if you can do that. Confidentiality is a must. You can't cross people with this. And then be careful of the potential for manipulation. Think of yourselves when you're doing these things as a shepherd trying to protect your people, not as a scientist trying to experiment on them. Other people are people made in the image of God just like you, and they have these rights and potential that you want to guard and protect, not that you want to experiment on. All right, that's it. That's the last of this chapter. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm looking forward to your career plans.